Today, let's look at how a paralyzed CEO hired a single dad like me and how we changed everything. Eleanor was the kind of powerful elite who never really saw the people serving her. By 32, she had built Whitmore Dynamics into a feared medical tech empire on the East Coast. They called her the Steel Executive. She ran her days on just 4 hours of sleep, endless marathon medals, and absolute iron discipline. But one rainy night, all that power was violently stripped away in a single deafening crash. A year later, she sat completely alone inside her silent, glass-walled luxury mansion. Trapped in a wheelchair, she was quietly accepting that her grand story was already over. That was when she hired me as her personal driver. Just a struggling single dad who offered quiet, steady, and loyal service. And somehow, against all odds, I ended up changing absolutely everything. If you believe a loyal driver can pull a broken boss back from the edge, stay with me. New York has a special cruelty. A cruelty reserved strictly for those falling from absolute power. The city that plastered her face across business magazines did not offer a second of sympathy. It just moved right along to the next big startup being built or destroyed. For years before that awful night, Eleanor was the corporate success story everyone wanted to talk about. At 26, she took her father's failing biotech firm and stripped it to the bone. Then she built Whitmore Dynamics, a massive business employing over 3,000 workers, partnering with massive hospital networks across 14 different states. She walked into industry conferences with such quiet dominance that executives twice her age nervously adjusted their ties. She ran grueling marathons on Sunday mornings, then closed 9-figure business deals by Monday afternoon. Sleeping soundly in a custom penthouse she designed herself, right down to the last light bulb. Every single piece of her life was deliberate, controlled, and constantly moving forward. Then came that dark night of November 14th. Just a routine business dinner, nothing out of the ordinary. Her car was navigating the wet Manhattan streets when her driver skidded on a slick turn. The vehicle hopped the curb, slammed a concrete wall, and violently rolled. Her driver died on impact. Rescuers pulled her from the twisted wreckage alive. But her body was broken in ways the surgeons described with cold, clinical calm. The truth hit weeks later, when her legs refused to move, no matter how hard she tried. The physical damage to her lower spine was absolutely devastating. Her medical team was honest without being cruel. Partial paralysis, they told her, possibly permanent. Therapy might help, but prepare for a future that looks vastly different from the life you knew. She just lay in that sterile hospital bed, staring blankly at the ceiling for hours. The next few months became a completely different kind of disaster. Her fiancé, a charming architect named Derek, held her hand through the first 3 weeks of her brutal recovery. But by the second month, he became noticeably distant. By month 3, her supposed partner walked out, claiming he wasn't built for a caregiver's life. As if her shattered spine was just an inconvenient lifestyle choice he was politely declining. I heard Eleanor never cried when he walked out. By then, she had retreated somewhere deep and cold inside, a dark place where she felt absolutely nothing, and honestly, she preferred it. To the press, her tragedy was completely irresistible. The Iron CEO falls, Whitmore heiress fights for more than just her empire. Those headlines pretended to care, but they were ruthless underneath. Photographers camped out right outside her rehab center. Her own board held closed-door meetings without even inviting her. Her CFO, Sebastian Hale, a guy wearing naked ambition like a cheap suit, started whispering to board members, quietly planting dark seeds of doubt. Was their boss still sharp enough? Could she still be the face of a massive brand selling health and wellness to the world? Could a paralyzed CEO really lead Whitmore Dynamics into its next massive phase? Eleanor knew exactly what Sebastian was pulling. She had always known exactly what kind of man he was. But knowing it and actually finding the strength to fight back are very different things. After leaving the hospital, she shut herself inside her massive family estate in Greenwich. A sprawling luxury mansion with wide halls and a ground floor fully retrofitted for her wheelchair. The house was beautiful, massive, and just completely, oppressively silent. Her assistant, Amelia, showed up every single morning. A rotation of nurses managed her heavy daily medication schedule. Lucas Bennett, her physical therapist, visited 3 times a week and reported back carefully. He noted her recovery was lagging far behind what you would expect for her age. But he never said what he was actually thinking. He didn't have to. You and I already know the truth. Eleanor had completely given up on ever getting better. She sat frozen at her desk for 12 to 14 hours a day. Work was the only language she still trusted. She mechanically chewed whatever Amelia brought her, tasting absolutely nothing. Her bedroom curtain stayed closed from the very day she arrived. Her massive dressing room wall displayed 6 pairs of premium running shoes she would never wear again, and she spent one awful Tuesday night forcing herself to grab every single one of her old marathon medals, shove them in a box, and banish them. She couldn't stomach looking at them, desperate to erase any reminder of the powerful woman she used to be. Her driver of 6 months was this stiff, completely humorless guy named Gerald. He handed in his resignation on a Friday afternoon, barely offering an excuse. He just hit his breaking point. Working for Eleanor was a daily nightmare. Honestly, she had become straight-up impossible to work for. She thanked him with that icy, distant politeness she showed everyone, then coldly ordered Amelia to hire a new driver. She figured it wouldn't matter, but stay with me because we know she was dead wrong. As for me, I never expected this random Tuesday to be the day my luck finally turned. I gave up on luck the day that hospital called to tell me my sweet wife, Rachel, had passed away 4 years earlier on a freezing March morning, leaving our daughter, Grace, asleep in her car seat downstairs while I stood frozen in a sterile hallway, entirely forgetting how to breathe for a moment that dragged on for agonizing years. I'm 34 years old now. I rent a tiny 2-bedroom apartment over in Bridgeport with Grace. She's 7 now, with Rachel's bright eyes and a fierce, unyielding stubbornness I secretly know she inherited straight from me. I want to tell you his story. After his wife Rachel died, he drove long-haul trucks for 2 years to numb his endless grief. But when little Grace turned 5, he quit. He could not bear to keep leaving her. He took any gig he could find, delivering packages, driving for private transport services. Even a month guarding a night warehouse that reeked of cheap chemicals and regret. But his paycheck was always 2 weeks behind where it actually needed to be. He fell 3 full months behind on rent. His landlord, Frank, a broad-shouldered guy who had been incredibly patient, finally taped an eviction notice to Caleb's front door that Wednesday. Yet something pressed much harder than rent. A harsh letter from Hargrove and Welsh, the ruthless attorneys representing his late wife's family. Rachel's parents had officially filed legal paperwork demanding partial custody of little Grace. Their legal argument was exactly the nightmare he had always feared. Claims of financial instability, no fixed routine, and inadequate provision. The kind of harsh language that sounded perfectly reasonable on paper, but let me tell you, it felt like a knife to the chest reading it at 2 in the morning. Grace was his everything. Caleb was never a man who used a word like everything lightly. He spoke carefully, but in this specific case, that exact word was devastatingly accurate. Without Grace, his grueling last 4 years made no sense whatsoever. He was absolutely not going to lose her. He decided this with the same quiet finality he applied to everything. No drama, no big announcement, just a permanent line drawn deep in the sand. Then he saw the online listing for the personal driver position at my company, Whitmore Dynamics, on a job board. The salary I offered was nearly triple what he was currently making. My requirements were intense: spotless record, stellar references, physical fitness, total discretion, and round-the-clock availability. The listing also clearly noted that the role demanded serious emotional resilience, along with the ability to work closely alongside me, a bitter wheelchair-bound woman with very specific accessibility needs. He read my warning twice, then called the office number and booked his interview. The morning of our interview, he laid out his best shirt. You know the kind, a 5-year-old white button-down, clean and pressed, showing no visible wear unless you looked closely. He drove his daughter to school, mentioning he had a very important corporate meeting. She just looked up with enormous brown eyes and whispered, "You always make things better, Dad. It's kind of your whole thing." Caleb honestly had no idea what to say to that. So he just kissed her forehead and climbed back into his car. My corporate lobby, where we held the interviews, was deliberately designed to make you feel entirely insignificant. Cold marble floors and a ceiling soaring 3 stories high. Young executives in tailored suits moved with the frantic urgency of people paid incredibly well to appear busy. Caleb sat in one of 8 chairs lined up outside my main conference room. Every other candidate wore tailored suits. He just wore that pressed white shirt and simple, clean dark trousers. He wasn't embarrassed by the stark contrast. Honestly, he felt absolutely nothing at all. He wanted the job, not the scenery. I, Amelia Brooks, conducted those interviews myself. I was famously efficient and possessed the particular, you and I know how misery drives people away. My assistant, Amelia, had simply grown immune to my anger. She flew through the pile of job candidates, checking off her mental boxes. Then she finally reached Caleb. She ran through the standard interview questions, then paused, studying his calm face longer than the others. He made absolutely no effort to impress her. The other candidates put on an act, sitting taller, trying desperately to please us. Caleb just sat there, answering as if he were reading off someone else's dry resume. When asked how he handled pressure, he actually took a quiet moment to think first. I just don't panic. That is about all I can promise. I rolled in near the end of the session, not to ask questions but to observe. When my wheelchair cleared the doorway, the heavy air in that conference room shifted instantly. Every remaining candidate suddenly sat up straight. I saw their fear completely cold to their sudden anxiety. I searched that row of faces like someone hunting for a single tool in a pile of junk. Then my eyes stopped on Caleb for a long moment. He met my eyes completely unfazed. I looked at my assistant, said, "That one," and wheeled myself right out. Amelia stared in surprise while Caleb barely even noticed either of us. I assumed his mind was already on the tedious paperwork waiting for him. When he stood up to leave, my assistant stopped him with a quiet warning. "Just a heads up, 3 drivers have quit this exact job in the past 8 months. He processed that warning, then simply muttered, "Good to know." He accepted. You can probably picture that first morning he pulled up to my gates. The black company sedan rolled up my driveway at exactly 7:58, 2 minutes early. Every previous driver made sure to park at exactly 8 o'clock sharp. I always found that rigid, performance-like punctuality incredibly irritating. I noted his early arrival but kept my mouth shut. Our daily routine quickly fell into a quiet rhythm. The passenger door was open before my wheelchair even reached it. He lifted my collapsed wheelchair into the trunk like someone who had stayed up late, practicing the motions to avoid making a scene. He never once offered to help me inside the vehicle unless I explicitly signaled that I needed support. There was no exhausting, patronizing commentary. Just hands on the wheel. The radio stayed off unless I asked, and he never spoke unless answering a direct question. During those first 3 days, I kept waiting for him to finally annoy me. He never did, no fake flattery, no hovering, just space. He never asked how I felt, nor did he offer those pitiful, gentle smiles that people use for tragedies. He treated me exactly the way one independent adult respects another fully independent adult. As if my physical limitations were merely minor bumps on the road we had to navigate, and the rest of my broken world was absolutely none of his business. It was incredibly disorienting. I was so used to people treating me like fragile glass, and I usually pushed them away with pure icy hostility. We rarely find that, but Caleb was just there, solid, quiet, and completely unwilling to abandon me. You see, I found myself watching my driver in the rearview mirror, paying far more attention than I ever intended. Our first real moment of friction happened on a Thursday. I was attending a medical tech conference on the west side, and the handicap entrance had a steep concrete ramp that was terribly neglected. My wheelchair caught a nasty gap in the cracked concrete, and I instantly lurched sideways. Caleb was right beside me in 2 quick steps, steadying the chair without grabbing. He gently adjusted my angle so I could roll forward. Locked in my bitter isolation, I didn't thank him, but he never looked offended. As I rolled inside, I heard him say calmly, "You're not weak. That ramp is just terribly designed." I froze for a heartbeat, then I pushed myself inside. That single sentence haunted my mind during the entire board meeting. Not because it was deeply profound, but because nobody had spoken to me like a real person in forever. Everyone else treated my limitations with the polite sadness of a funeral they were already mourning. Caleb just saw a mechanical problem with a concrete ramp. As if I was perfectly fine, and the ramp was what actually needed fixing. Let's be honest, the shift was tiny, and I would have missed it if I wasn't paying attention. 10 days into working for me, Caleb asked, politely but without any visible nervousness, if he could bring his young daughter along for my late evening pickup. His sitter canceled, and leaving Grace home alone for 3 hours was something he absolutely refused to do. I sat in silence for a long moment before finally muttering, just this once. Grace arrived wearing a bright purple winter jacket with a broken zipper, holding a small paperback book about deep-sea creatures. She climbed into the front seat with a focused seriousness that caught my eye instantly. The little girl didn't stare. She just said hello with the directness of a kid taught to look people in the eye, and opened her book. I watched her quietly for several miles, saying absolutely nothing. It was little Grace who finally broke the silence. Looking up from her anglerfish page, she spoke with pure curiosity, totally unaware of the awkwardness. Do you remember what it feels like to run really fast? The inside of the luxury sedan went totally dead silent. I felt that innocent question strike deep behind my ribs, not as pain but intense pressure. Caleb kept his eyes locked firmly on the road. Then Grace spoke again, as casual as if we were discussing the evening weather. Because if you can't run anymore, you can always just go look at things. That's what my dad always tells me. Moving isn't the point. Seeing is the point. I slowly turned my head toward the window. Have you ever felt that? The city blurred past, and I sat there completely silent for miles. Reaching the estate, I exited the vehicle without saying a single word. Caleb guided the heavy wheelchair down. I rolled toward the front door, then suddenly stopped. Without looking back, I simply said, "Good night, Grace." "Good night," Grace answered cheerfully, diving right back into her fish book. That night, finally beginning to heal, I reached over and pulled my heavy bedroom curtains open. She would sit in the dark, staring out at the moving city lights. It was that cold, beautiful indifference of a world that never stopped for her. But right then, a stubborn little spark of life started stirring deep inside her. She couldn't name that feeling yet, but she left her curtains wide open. Spring crept into Greenwich like always, cautious at first, then fully committing. The trees lining her driveway. They exploded from bare branches to full bloom in just a single week. After a long winter trapped inside her own head, she finally noticed them. As her new driver, I started suggesting quick detours on our office commutes. Nothing major. Just driving through the park when the cherry blossoms were in peak bloom. Or stopping at a local bakery after meetings because I noticed she hadn't eaten anything by noon. Her kitchen staff had already warned me she wasn't touching her dinners either. I never made a fuss about it, I just offered, letting her decide. She always went along with it, choosing not to overthink the reason. Our talks grew the exact same way, in quiet, completely unforced little steps. One afternoon, she asked me why I'd finally quit. Long-haul trucking, she meant. I answered in my usual steady, quiet voice. I just couldn't stand being away from Grace. She asked if it was tough giving up that steady driver's paycheck. I admitted it was hard, but I'd do it again tomorrow. She just stared at me. Then she went back to her tablet, and we sat in silence for 20 minutes. But let me tell you, that silence felt completely different than the old ones. I never pressed her about the car crash. I never mentioned Derek. I didn't ask about her board of directors, or if she was secretly terrified. Those were the only topics everyone else in her life kept circling. Carefully or clumsily, but absolutely constantly. I decided her tragedies were hers to share when she was ready. Till then, we had other things to discuss. The weather, or my daughter Grace's latest obsession with glowing deep-sea creatures. The absolute absurdity of certain highway on-ramps. Whether downtown street cart coffee was actually good, or if she just loved getting some fresh air. She actually started laughing again, not a polite fake chuckle. Real, honest laughter. Once over a joke Grace made, and once when I roasted a meter maid over some terrible traffic cone placement. Those laughs were brief, but honestly, they seemed to startle her both times. Amelia noticed it, Lucas Bennett did too. Her mother, Hannah Whitmore, called from Boston and declared, "You sound completely different, Eleanor." She didn't say better, her mother was always cautious, but she definitely said different. Grace started drawing these little pictures, leaving them in the back seat of the car for her. Mostly sea creatures, complete with wild names she made up, One afternoon she found a drawing of a woman in a wheelchair staring at the sky, wearing a crown made of bright starfish. Scrawled at the bottom in shaky block letters, "For the pretty wheelchair lady." She held that piece of paper for a long time, completely speechless. She sat in the back seat, no longer completely alone. I watched her let herself cry for about 45 seconds. That was the longest she'd cried since leaving the hospital. Then she carefully folded my daughter's drawing, tucking it safely inside her jacket pocket. That was the day I finally told her about Rachel, about my wife. I wasn't begging for sympathy. I just shared it as a fact, like she'd finally earned the right to know. I told her very simply that Rachel had been ill. A rare autoimmune condition. It progressed faster than anyone predicted. Rachel was only 31 years old. My little Grace was just 3. For several months after she passed, I existed in a state I'd describe, with typical understatement, as totally non-functional. I dragged myself out of it because I had to. Grace needed her father. Not because I magically figured life out or truly healed in any way, but because my little girl needed me there, so I chose to show up. She quietly asked me how I actually survived it. I kept my eyes on the road. Most days I didn't live because I wanted to, I said. I lived because she needed breakfast. She sat in the back, silently absorbing that. "That's an honest answer," she finally whispered. "It's the only one I've got," I replied. That changed her. She started showing up to physical therapy with something entirely new, genuine attention. Absolute focus. She pushed herself harder, and she asked Lucas sharper questions. She stopped seeing the exercises as miserable chores, treating them instead like business problems to solve. Lucas called it a massive behavioral shift. He was smart enough not to guess out loud about where her new fire came from. You and I know healing takes time. By late April, she was still in the wheelchair. She still faced mornings that were pitch black and painfully quiet, but she was finally moving forward, not running away. And the difference between those two directions meant absolutely everything. Her rival Sebastian Hale could always read a room, and her room had clearly changed. He first noticed her shift during a board prep meeting in mid-April. She was sitting at the head of the table, showing a fierce sharpness that had been entirely missing for months. She quickly cut off 2 digressions. She caught a massive discrepancy in the quarterly projections that 3 executives missed entirely. Then she left the room in that heavy, purposeful silence that always preceded her biggest moves. I learned later that Sebastian drove home that night seething. Let's look at his plan. He spent 8 months patiently feeding the board a lie. His narrative claimed she wasn't recovering at all, that her corporate judgment was completely compromised, that her company needed stable leadership, and that stable leadership conveniently looked exactly like Sebastian. He already had 3 board members feeling sympathetic towards him. One was actively in his corner. And a full leadership transition proposal sat quietly waiting inside an encrypted folder on his laptop. He had been waiting for her to finally collapse under her own heavy weight. She was highly inconveniently refusing to collapse, so he targeted me. A few discreet background checks through a private corporate investigator quickly exposed my hidden struggles. I was deeply financially exposed and falling significantly behind on rent. I faced a vicious custody battle with my in-laws, 0 savings, absolutely no safety net. He had found a pressure point. Sebastian loved exploiting pressure points. He arranged a secret meeting through an intermediary. Imagine this with me, a quick secret meeting on neutral ground. Sebastian laid out his deal, cold and brutal as a hostile takeover. A massive payout if I resigned immediately, walking away without another word. I heard him out without showing a single emotion. Then I simply said no. He never saw that coming. The shock frustrated him far more than my refusal. People in my shoes always took the money. To him, the math was simple. He pushed harder, spelling out exactly how dangerous it was to refuse him. I just told him, "I heard you the first time." I stood up and walked away, so Sebastian moved to his backup plan. He began spreading a nasty rumor, never out loud, of course. He relied on a quiet web of corporate lies and toxic whispers. He claimed I was manipulating Eleanor's fragile trust just to get ahead. He told them my influence over her was a danger to the company, that a vulnerable wheelchair-bound CEO, getting emotionally close to her unvetted driver, was a corporate crisis. The lie spread quickly. Soon, 2 board members started asking questions. One demanded an official, independent investigation. Hannah Whitmore called from Boston, dragging Eleanor into a harsh conversation to warn her. The tabloids caught wind of the story and ran a piece, featuring a photo of Grace and me. The picture was cropped to make our innocent interaction look highly inappropriate. When Eleanor saw the article that Tuesday, a cold, sharp fury took over her completely. The moment I arrived the next morning, I felt the heavy shift in the air. She sat frozen in her chair, fighting desperately to hide how deeply she was hurting. She stared right at me the instant I stepped inside and asked, without any hesitation, "Are you planning to walk away?" I answered her truthfully, "I have been thinking about it." My raw honesty and the fact that I did not deny her worst fears pierced right through her armor, sparking a sudden wave of emotion. She went completely silent, then she asked me very softly, "Why?" "Because this media circus is only holding you back from recovering." I said, "And you do not need me making your life any harder." Eleanor just stared at me for a long time, something deep shifting behind her eyes. It was a feeling of safety she had forgotten, and did not quite trust yet. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but on the verge of breaking. "You are the only person in my life right now," she whispered. "Who makes me feel like I am not already dead?" Her words hung heavy in the silent room. Neither of us dared to move. I could not find the words right away. I just stood there clutching her keys, knowing I could never walk away and abandon her. Right then and there, I made the decision to stay by her side. I finally nodded. "Okay, I will stay." I set the keys down on the table and went out to fetch her car. Now, stay with me, because Sebastian's corporate plot did not crumble from some huge discovery. It actually fell apart because of a tiny detail I noticed that very morning. I was simply checking her car's service history, an old habit from my driving days. His past taught him that ignoring tiny mechanical glitches was the fastest way to freeze on the shoulder of Interstate 90 in January. That's why he noticed my vehicle file from the night of my terrible accident. My file had a service note that someone had altered twice. You and I know those boring paperwork tweaks could mean absolutely nothing, or point to one very specific terrifying truth. The first inspection actually flagged an anomaly in my brakes before the car left that night. Yet the altered version completely erased it. Caleb didn't want to break my spirit. He called Owen Price instead. Owen was Whitmore Dynamics' chief legal counsel, a precise, cautious man in his late 50s who'd served our company for over a decade, possessing one defining trait that made him far more valuable than anyone else. He was never afraid of the brutal truth, no matter how painful. Caleb laid out the facts, calm and steady, while Owen just listened without interrupting. Owen made 2 calls that afternoon. What surfaced over the next 10 days shook us deeply. They uncovered a suspicious conversation between our routine service contractor and an insider with direct access to my company's internal scheduling system. That exact conversation happened 48 hours before my horrific crash. My maintenance log was altered after the crash, quietly and with professional precision, by someone with the high-level clearance and a sinister motive to erase the paper trail. Owen gave Caleb the name of a trusted former traffic investigator he knew well, and Caleb reached out to a reliable buddy from his trucking days, a guy who spent years meticulously tracking major highway accidents, to pinpoint exactly which traffic cameras covered my accident's route. What that footage finally showed left no room for doubt. Let's look at the truth. My brakes failed, but not from the rain, and definitely not my driving. My brake line was tampered with. The catastrophic failure was deliberately planned. The single name waiting at the end of every thread, buried deep in those logs, hidden inside the contractor's call history, behind the ghost messages moving through my own company's internal network, was Sebastian Hale. Caleb, who never abandoned me, told me on a quiet Sunday. He sat across from my wheelchair in the silent room, sharing what they'd uncovered with that same familiar, gentle, matter-of-fact voice he always used. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He didn't soften the blow. I couldn't speak for almost 3 minutes after he finished. I sat perfectly still, a heavy silence that wasn't peace but its dark opposite. The terrifying, suffocating pressure of a storm before it breaks. I always knew Sebastian was ruthlessly ambitious. I knew he was cold and calculating. But I never let myself believe he was capable of this. Marcus died because of him. I was trapped in this wheelchair because of his greed. You see, it wasn't bad luck, weather, or the cruel randomness of a wet road. It happened because Sebastian decided destroying my body was cheaper than trying to remove me. I looked at my silent protector and asked, with a chilling quietness far more terrifying than anger, "How long have you known?" 2 weeks, he told us. I wanted to be certain before telling you. I watched Eleanor nod slowly. That same week, Sebastian sent her an official demand to show up. He called an emergency board meeting for the very next Friday. On paper, it was just standard corporate planning, but you and I know the truth. Sebastian had the votes and a ruthless plan. He fully intended to leave that boardroom, holding her forced resignation. He spent 11 months plotting this takeover. Eleanor simply replied she would attend. 3 days later, I watched her and Owen hand federal agents the proof. The night before the meeting, my little girl Grace drew a lion. She left it on my car back seat with a sweet note. In her messy kid handwriting, it said, "You are the lion." I found it before picking Eleanor up. I did not say a word, just set it beside her. She stared at it during our entire drive into Manhattan, keeping a tight, desperate grip. We finally arrived at the 42nd floor Whitmore boardroom. The Dynamics headquarters had a massive window wall overlooking the entire city skyline. On that crisp late May morning, blinding sunlight cut horizontally straight through the room. The massive wooden conference table looked almost like a ceremonial altar. Sebastian Hale showed up early. He grabbed the seat just right of center, not Eleanor's main head chair, but close enough to challenge her dominance. He looked completely comfortable. He had planned this corporate coup with his usual ruthless, absolute precision. He had backup plans for every single thing he thought might happen. But here is what he never planned for. Eleanor Whitmore rolling into that boardroom looking like her old, powerful self. She rolled through those double doors at 9. Amelia followed, and I trailed 3 steps behind, keeping my blank driver's expression. She wore the sharp navy suit she had not touched since the crash. Her hair was pinned up. Her hands pushed those wheels with total confidence. I watched Sebastian stare as she crossed the room. For the first time, he felt a strange fear. It was something he probably did not even recognize as doubt. She calmly greeted every board member by name. Picture this. She parked unassisted at the head of the table, tossing down a single folder. Sebastian began his speech with practiced, absolute smoothness. He thanked the executives for coming. He praised the company's strong financial quarter. Then, armed with a deeply fake rehearsed sadness, he slid right into his main argument. The urgent issue of leadership stability. The big question of Eleanor's capacity. Whether, after that horrific car crash, she could actually lead this business forward. He never outright called her unfit. He just claimed stakeholders deserved absolute certainty. He faked compassion so well, I noticed 3 board members nodding along. One executive even checked his phone. My boss waited patiently for him to finish. Then she simply said, "Thank you, Sebastian," and opened the file. The first document she placed on the table was the original Certified Vehicle Service record, the real one. Obtained through Owen's legal team, she calmly explained exactly what this hidden evidence proved. You can guess what followed next. The corrupt contractor's communication logs. The third document, a printed transcript of those calls. The fourth was a deep forensic analysis of her brakes, prepared by the private investigator she had hired, confirming her crash wasn't just mechanical wear, it was deliberate sabotage. She let each page sit for 30 seconds, long enough for the boardroom to fully process it. Then she looked right at them. "My crash wasn't an accident," she said. The room went dead quiet. You could actually hear the air conditioning. Sebastian had gone completely still. His face went totally blank, like his brain had completely short-circuited. She stared right at him. "You made a massive miscalculation," she said. "You assumed that breaking my body would break my spirit entirely. You figured everyone around me would just act exactly the way you do. That everything has a price tag and everyone can be bought." She paused. She added, "One person didn't play your game, because sometimes the people hired to serve us end up saving us." The whole room's attention shifted briefly and collectively, right over to me. I stood near the back wall with that practiced invisibility of a man who drove for a living, deciding this corporate showdown wasn't my moment. Sebastian tried to speak. He managed half a sentence about fake document provenance before Owen. Price cut him off with the precise courtesy of a man who's spent decades delivering terrible news in the most legally airtight manner possible. At Owen's signal, 2 FBI agents waiting in the lobby finally came upstairs. Sebastian didn't even make a scene. He was the type of man who truly believed his own lies, right up until hard evidence shattered his reality. He was escorted out between the agents with a stunned stillness, like his entire plan had just vanished into thin air. Those final charges were massive: corporate fraud, extreme financial misconduct, and conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm. Building that legal case would take 18 grueling months to resolve. Sebastian never stepped foot in her building again. Once those doors closed, the boardroom stayed incredibly quiet. Then she looked around the table, staring down the board members Sebastian had secretly bought off over the past year. She didn't look like a triumphant CEO, just exhausted, clear-headed, and completely present. "I want to discuss the next 2 years," she told them. "If anyone here still doubts my capacity to lead this company, I'd rather hear them now, instead of during a series of cowardly private meetings." Dead silence. She opened a second file folder and officially began the meeting. I slipped out quietly 20 minutes later. I went downstairs to her car and ate the sandwich I'd packed that morning. I texted my daughter's school to confirm Grace's afternoon pickup. Then I just leaned back in the driver's seat, staring up. A quiet, deep satisfaction washed over me, that rare feeling right between real pride and absolute relief. I sat there and thought about my late wife, Rachel, the way I sometimes let myself do during quiet, idle moments. Thinking she would have actually found my boss pretty interesting. Stick with me here. Eleanor always loved complicated people who were actually worth the effort. I was still mulling that over when she finally came downstairs 2 hours later. The summer that followed felt slower, much lighter than any we'd shared in years. My own investigation wrapped up quickly. Whitmore dynamics stabilized fast once we finally booted Sebastian off the corporate board. Forensic accountants dug in, and the dark truth finally surfaced. He had deliberately cooked the books, trying to completely destroy her board's confidence. With his lies fully exposed, the corporate balance sheet was actually far stronger than anyone realized. We began carefully rebuilding her executive team. She hired a new CFO from Boston, a truly brilliant woman named Patricia Landis. She had that sharp, cold intelligence Eleanor recognized in herself. Patricia completely restructured 2 failing divisions, while Eleanor accepted 3 speaking gigs she'd dodged all last year. She kept up physical therapy with Lucas, but her real healing happened at home. She just stopped trying to prove her worth to others and started pushing to see what her body could do. Our journey was painfully slow and real, completely unpredictable because I stayed by her side through it all. No clean Hollywood ending, no straight line, just stubborn, grinding physical progress. By late August, she stood with support. Not walking, maybe never the same way again, but standing tall and completely upright. Gripping the parallel bars in Lucas's clinic for 23 seconds first, then 41 the second time. And she stopped counting after that, mostly because she finally quit caring about raw numbers and started focusing entirely on the feeling. That feeling was absolutely incredible. Now picture this: the late September leadership summit with 300 employees, executives, and the board. It was the first one she'd actually attended since the crash. The year before, she had only sent a quick video. We recorded that in her dark study, heavy curtains pulled tight behind her, and she couldn't even bring herself to watch it afterward. But this year she attended in person. She totally improvised what happened right after finishing her opening remarks. She'd penned a sharp, strategic, incredibly forward-looking speech. She nailed the delivery, but instead of grabbing her wheelchair wheels to roll back from the speaker's table, something deep inside just made her stop. She grabbed the edge of the heavy wooden table instead. Lucas watched quietly from the back of the room. He was technically Amelia's +1, but I saw him tense up the moment he realized exactly what she was about to do. She shoved Modest upright, firmly gripping that wooden table. Her arms shook from the massive effort as the entire room fell dead silent. She held her ground, The clock on the back wall said it lasted 11 seconds. But to me it felt like a lifetime. My daughter Grace hid in the side hall, since kids weren't allowed in the corporate space. But she was there because I couldn't find a sitter, and Amelia said this was a truly special circumstance. And you should know, my daughter watched her heal through that glass panel. When I finally stood, Grace burst through the door, running across the boardroom with absolute disregard for any rules, a special right only 7-year-olds have in moments of pure joy. She threw her small arms around my waist, her voice ringing out in the suddenly silent room. I knew you could do it. I knew it all along. I slowly sank back down. I put a trembling hand on Grace's hair, holding her tight. I did not cry. There was no way I would break down in front of 300 people. But my eyes stung and my hands shook. And across the room, Caleb, who stood leaning against the back wall with his arms folded, stared down at the floor, the exact way you and I do when trying to lock heavy emotions inside. Later, in the quiet parking garage, I sat in the back seat while Caleb packed away my wheelchair. The conference crowd was slowly thinning out around us. Faint voices and heavy footsteps mixed with the hum of the elevators. Grace was fast asleep next to me, her cheek pressed to my arm, still holding onto my sleeve. She is completely out, Caleb whispered, looking back from the driver's seat. I see that, I murmured, looking down at little Grace. Then I looked up. I want to tell you something. He waited quietly. You did not fix my legs, I said. I want you to know that I truly understand that. You did not perform some medical miracle or change the harsh physical truth. I am still in this wheelchair, and I might be here forever. I paused, but somewhere between our talk earlier, about the ramp and those drawings by Grace, and your random comment about breakfast, I actually started believing I was worth healing. I had not felt like that since before my accident. Caleb did not say a word. Outside, another car drove past us. I think you would have found your way anyway, he replied. Perhaps, I whispered, but you definitely got me there faster. We drove back through the warm September evening, the city lights glowing around us. Grace slept deeply behind us, her tiny hand still holding fast to my jacket sleeve. Caleb drove just like he always did, steady, completely calm, with both hands on the wheel. I quietly watched the glowing city slide past my window. I reflected on what I had shared, his quiet response, and that incredibly special silence between two people who are not ready to say the truth yet. We have all felt that. I would love to know, I said, keeping my gaze ahead. If you view our situation differently than I do. He caught my eye in the mirror. View what? He asked, as I kept my eyes focused on the passing streets, asking if this was just a job. The silence that stretched between us was deep enough to serve as an answer. When he did speak, his voice had the same calm tone he always used. But after all these months, I knew his quiet nature did not mean he did not care. It was not just a job, he murmured, the moment you tucked Grace's drawing into your coat. I finally met his eyes then, staring right into the rearview mirror. He held my gaze for only a brief second before turning back to the dark highway. I remained silent, and so did he. Back home, he helped with my chair. Our hands met in our daily routine, but neither of us pulled away. Sometimes the person who heals you is not a doctor, but the one who never leaves your side. Silence wrapped completely around us that night. Grace shifted quietly in the back seat. The city glow hid the stars, yet the sky above us stayed wonderfully clear. Caleb whispered from the front, I am not going anywhere. I watched him quietly for a second before replying, good. 3 weeks went by, a bright Sunday afternoon in October. Caleb guided my wheelchair along the winding path through Binney Park in Greenwich. Autumn maples had turned, amber sunlight filtering through the bright orange and gold leaves. Everything held that quiet Sunday peace, like the year was taking one deep, slow breath before the world starts to change. His little girl Grace ran ahead of us with arms open wide. She spun a wild, detailed tale about a daring crew of deep-sea scientists finding a rare type of glowing crab. Every few steps she stopped to announce her latest discoveries, directing her reports right to me. I made sure to treat her imaginary stories with the deep respect they deserved. I clutched a hot coffee from the small stand near the park entrance. Caleb's hands never left my wheelchair. We stayed silent, and it felt completely right. We shared a comfortable silence, the beautiful kind that needs no words at all. A lady walking her golden retriever strolled past, offering the three of us a warm smile. That simple, kind look strangers give when they see what looks like a family. I simply watched her pass. Have you ever noticed how a passing smile can mean so many things at once? It is just a guess, a random moment, yet it feels completely true. For most of the past year, I truly believed my life ended on November 14th. That the person who survived the crash was barely existing. Just a broken shadow managing the messy wreckage of the CEO I once was. I was ready to simply run out my remaining clock with a quiet, heavy exhaustion that I had mistaken for peaceful acceptance. What I finally see now, sitting in this warm light, feeling my loyal driver's hands on my chair, while a 7-year-old shouts funny names at the geese, is that the accident truly did destroy my old self. That powerful CEO who relied solely on control and loneliness, and the false belief that being completely alone meant being safe. She was brilliant, fast, and strong. I still miss her, which is incredibly painful. Yet the woman I am today, healing slowly, relying on the one who stayed, is not broken. I am simply different, and this life finally belongs to me. Honestly, it feels much more real than who I was before. Grace ran back to us at top speed, holding onto my wheelchair with both hands. She gasped out, "There are real swans over there, 2 of them. We must go look right now." "Absolutely," I answered. "Show us the way." Grace bolted again, waving her hand behind her to make sure we kept up. Caleb pushed my chair forward, and together we went to see the swans. But I now know my healing came from the one person who never abandoned me. She had been completely wrong. Honestly, the real terror is watching someone believe they're worthless once their control is gone. Then she hired me as her driver, just a quiet dad raising an ocean-obsessed kid. I had this way of looking at broken wheelchair ramps that somehow totally rebuilt her shattered confidence and handed her self-worth right back to her. I did it slowly, no big fuss, just the way true, lasting healing actually happens. No grand corporate gestures or empty promises, just through breakfast. Through arriving 2 minutes early, reminding her she wasn't weak. The ramp is just poorly designed. Through simply staying. She honestly thought her story ended the night her car smashed into that barrier on a rainy Manhattan street. But stick with me, stories rarely end where we expect. Sometimes her true ending was much quieter than that tragic crash, a simple October Sunday. Hot coffee in hand, my little girl shouting about swans she was certain she needed to show her. Because sometimes the miracle is not standing up again. Sometimes the real miracle is just finding a reason to keep pushing forward and understanding. You and I both know that reason doesn't need to be massive to be enough.